This is the 007 Debriefings. I'm Intelligence Officer Wiz.
And I'm Weapons Specialist Zero.
Zero, how you doing this week?
A little better. I am being moved from a nightmarish project to a project that's much more fun and mentally engaging.
Oh, nice. It's better when the projects are actually, I guess, interesting, is what you say. Correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. So we are here to discuss the cinematic adventures of one James Bond. This week, Quantum of Solace. Zero, before we get started, I need to point out something. I said a number of times in our audio review that Casino Royale is a prequel movie. That's technically incorrect. It's a reboot.
Yep.
Yeah, so thank you for correcting me during the podcast.
Totally slipped my mind.
Yeah. Any way to make a fool out of me is good for you, then, isn't it, huh? Yeah. But, But all right, so let's get into the movie that we're watching right now, Quantum of Solace. This is considered one of your favorites, correct?
Yeah, it's considered one of my favorites, but mostly as a revenge story.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was actually not a novel, this was actually a short story, and it was a short story that took place after Casino Royale. So that's one of the main reasons I like it. I know a lot of critics have said, it's a weak Daniel Craig Bond movie and stuff like that, but I think if you look at it at the surface, it will seem like a very weak Bond movie, but there's just so much intrigue in this one that I think that if you're looking at the surface, you'll just miss so much.
Let's get into our mission objectives. We're going to break down the elements of this Bond movie. So let's start with 007, which is James Bond, played by Daniel Craig.
In this one, holy cow, he is a man driven. The start of the movie, you see him just racing around the streets of Italy, just in the Aston Martin. And you think it's just, kind of a relaxing drive, and then just the dramatic music just kind of cuts, and then it's just a highway chase. He's being shot down by some Mr. White's henchmen, and he's just weaving in and out of the streets. The Aston Martin's just getting torn up during this whole drive. You just see sort of just the focus that Bond has. He's just like, I've got the guy that was responsible for Vespa's death, and I'm going to make sure to get him to tell me everything he knows, all the while just avoiding all the henchmen. And of course, there's a little bit of cheekiness too, because of course when the intro sequence is kind of done, he gets to the MI6 hideout in Italy and just pops the trunk, and he's got kind of like a smart ass, hey, it's time to get out. It's just like, okay, we've got a little smart ass in there. Okay, that's good. Throughout the movie, he's definitely a little bit more driven and just very, very focused on his quest to get revenge and everything. Through it all, you kind of see him go down dark paths very, very quickly. And I think one of my favorite sequences where it just kind of shows how dark he's gone is the opera house out in Bregenz in Austria. They go through the chase sequence. He ends up chasing down a guy to the roof of the opera house. The guy turns out to be a bodyguard for a very, very powerful politician, and he's kind of holding the guy at gunpoint, and he's kind of interrogating him, going, hey, who do you work for? And the guy's just antagonizing Bond right back, going, piss off, and just continually keeps his silence and everything. And then, of course, you have the dramatic scene where just Bond's holding him by, like, just the bare threads of his tie, and basically says, I asked you a question, and the guy refuses to answer, throws him off a roof, and it's just like, Jesus, holy shit, he is just getting real dark with this. It's just kind of interesting seeing him sort of trek down through darkness and everything. He sort of finds a little bit of light with the Bond girl and everything. And it's kind of interesting because through the end sequence, he sort of, I guess you could say, he regains his humanity. And especially when you get to the conclusion of the movie, he completes his objective and he just seems like he's been made whole again. It's just sort of an interesting path of just diving straight into darkness, and then right when you get to the climax, things kind of change, and then he sort of starts to try to climb his way out of the darkness and find light.
So I agree in certain aspects of what you're saying. This is something of a first with the Bond films, and it's that this Bond character has character growth. In all the other Bond films, what happens? Bond does something, he completes his mission, and then it resets the next movie. It's like it never even happened, except for maybe key sequences in the other movie. But in this, there's growth to this Bond. That said, I don't think it's entirely that deep. The only thing I can really say about this is that this is a continuation of Casino Royale. And it's good for what it is. But I gotta say, I just wanted more depth to this character that wasn't there.
That's most certainly a fair criticism. Maybe it's just me sort of fascinated with, I guess you could call it like an inverted hero's journey sort of a thing. I think that's why I kind of see sort of just Bond's continual descent into darkness and then trying to find his way out of that darkness and everything.
I don't think it's a bad performance. I think he's actually very good in this. It's just compared to the last one, it's like, ooh, that's kind of a step down.
I think part of it is likely from the fact that you're trying to adapt a short story into a full-blown movie.
Yes, that's true.
That's going to be a little difficult because, well, a short story is just that. It's a short story. It's not a full-blown novel. Being able to kind of adapt things that you would have in a novel or just take some of the more bombastic sequences out of the novel, not going to happen with this one because this one's a short story, so you're going to have to kind of work with what you got and maybe try to adapt some things, take some massive creative liberties on things. I'm ashamed to admit this, but I never got a chance to read the short story, and it's been one of the things on my list to do.
Oh, okay. All right, so let's get into villains, and the villain is Dominic Green, played by Matthew Amalric.
Green's kind of an interesting villain, mostly because he's sort of a planner. He's got lots of henchmen to kind of do things, mostly because his organization, Quantum, sort of buys everyone off. He kind of conceals his motives with his Eco Park initiative because he's kind of one of those environmentalist types. Unfortunately, because he's sort of a planner villain, it's not very interesting in some ways. He's got this sort of like hot and cold relationship with Camille and everything, but once he finally figures out that Camille is finally on the side of double-crossing him and everything, that's where sort of like that dynamic ends up being lost. And I think really the only moment where you kind of see Green take any real big action is the fight sequence towards the end and everything. If you kind of like the planning villain that's got everything perfect, then he might be kind of interesting, but for those who kind of like the villain with a little bit more hand-in-hand involvement, then you might be disappointed.
I look at Dominic Green in this movie and say he's not exactly bad, but he's also fairly forgettable. Like, this is my third time watching this movie, and a lot of it was like, I don't remember any of this. And I think that's because the villain himself is very forgettable in this. I think the most disappointing thing about him is he's a standard Bond villain. We had the Shift in the last movie. It was a very different type of Bond villain. But in this, he is very standard. What is he trying to do? Overthrow a government and set up a puppet dictator. So he's got that little sneering super villain kind of thing, like, I'm gonna do the selfish thing and screw a lot of people, which is much less interesting than what we had in the previous movie. It's not bad. It's not a bad performance either. Amalric does a good job as a sneering villain, well enough at least, but there isn't much more to him than, I am evil, watch me laugh as I hurt many people. That makes it a lot less interesting when it comes to this villain.
There is one moment that you can tell he's just kind of having fun with the role, and it's the end of the opera house sequence where you have the politician's bodyguard land on the hood of his car. You hear him ask, is he one of ours? And then the henchmen just shake their heads no, and he's like, then he shouldn't be looking at me. And then you're just like, oh, he's just having fun with that sequence right there.
So let's get into Bond Girl, which is Camille Montez, played by Olga Kurylenko.
I like Olga Kurylenko a lot. I think she's absolutely cute. This role is kind of interesting because if I remember right, I think she's more of an action star, and this actually has her kind of doing more spy espionage stuff. It isn't until the end that you see sort of the action sequence chops kind of come to fruition and everything. She's kind of an interesting character, especially with just how she's kind of antagonizing Green to kind of get information on him and stuff like that. But at the same time, she's also not sure Bond and his motives, and it isn't until just you have the sequence where they end up landing in the sinkhole that she ends up learning a little bit more about Bond and his motives and everything like that.
Well, what's interesting about Bond Girl is that she shares a common theme with Bond in this, and that is revenge. I think her thing is that the dictator that Green is trying to put in place killed her family, essentially, and is trying to gain revenge for that. And there is that little push and pull a little bit with her and Bond. but I think the writing does not give enough connective tissue there to actually have a much stronger bond in there. A much stronger bond between Bond. I wish I came up with a better word than Bond on that one, but that's what I'm going to do here. So, but I think she's interesting as a character and has a fairly unique look when considering the rest of the Bond girls. But there's just no depth to this character, really. It's just that she's seeking revenge, and she's attractive, and that's about it. Which, to be fair, is more depth than I think some of the other Bond films have given their Bond girls. But I kind of agree to a certain extent. I think this is a good actress, and I think she could actually do a lot more in this movie. And the way she did action in certain sequences, she was very good in it. But I just think that there should have been more to this character than there was. And when it came to the end, it just kind of was a letdown. But I will say this, I'm actually quite happy they didn't turn her to a love interest at the end. I was actually very happy with that end.
The end where she kind of just feels sorry for Bond, she sees how much pain this whole saga has caused him. When she says something to the effect of, I hope you find peace, and I hope you can finally get the answers you're looking for. It was kind of interesting because, of course, just throughout the whole movie, Bond's just been kind of driven on his mission and everything, and just he hasn't really had a time to kind of slow down and think about, just all the stuff that had happened between him and Vespa. It was just kind of they killed Vespa, gotta take revenge, and just he hasn't really had any real substantial time to kind of process his grief and frustration and everything. That was kind of nice, and like you pointed out, just it was interesting and nice that they didn't turn her into a love interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And something we should have mentioned in the 007 section is that the one time that this Bond did sleep with somebody, it was for the mission and for a means to his own end, which I thought was actually very smartly done in that. So, all right, let's get into spy action.
There's quite a lot of action, but there's also some interesting spy and espionage sequences. One of my favorite sequences in this movie is the opera house in Bregenz, Austria. Bond, of course, is just tailing everyone to this opera performance and everything, and he's trying to kind of put the pieces together on why Green is flying out to a opera house in Austria after, just being out in Haiti and everything. You just see him sort of like watching the room, trying to figure everything out, and then he figures out that certain guests get a special gift bag instead of the normal one. So he ends up kind of just figuring it out, tails a guy, takes his stuff, finds out that there's a super secret little earpiece to tune into like a super secret conversation. And the reason why it's kind of fun is, of course, just Bond's just kind of listening to the conversation, and it's just a bunch of the planning type villain characters in Green's quantum organization talking about how they're going to dupe the United States and everything like that. And they're just thinking that they're just able to act in complete impunity, and then of course Bond just kind of gets the drop on them, and he's just like, can I ask you all a question? You might want to find a better place to meet. And then you see just very, very powerful and connected people just freaking the fuck out that they've been made and just trying to exit out of the theater. And Bond is just using his camera phone to capture pictures of these powerful and connected people, getting them sent off to MI6 to have them process the information and determine their identities and everything. You see just Tanner sitting in the MI6 station just looking at these photos coming in, and he's just got this like flabbergasted look like, oh fuck. And for me, it was just kind of an interesting sort of like spy espionage sequence, mostly because just Bond kind of does what he needs to do in with brutal effectiveness. You also have Tanner and M sort of kind of questioning his motives because, again, he's also been a bit on a killing spree. So it's just kind of like oh shit, he actually does have information. Huh.
I will say the spy and espionage stuff is better in this movie than I would say the action stuff in this. I had a big problem with the action sequences in the first half of the film. You're going to guess why that is, and that's because of the shaky cam Bourne-style cinematography they chose in this. You mentioned in the beginning the car chase sequence. I thought that would have been a really great sequence if I could see what the fuck was going on, because it was shaking violently throughout the entire time. Honestly, it did nothing to enhance it at all in that sequence. But on top of that, it just made it really hard to actually watch because I couldn't really discern what exactly was going on. Like, for the most part, I could, but the details of what happens are what make these sequences so good, and you just couldn't see the sequences at that. But I agree that the spy and espionage stuff is actually very good in this movie, and it makes it very interesting. And like you mentioned with the Bond character, with him dealing with issues when it came to M and Tanner, it actually gave it a little bit more of an edge to it. I gotta be honest though, as good as that tension is, it's still pretty much a standard Bond film when it comes to action and spy sequence stuff, which again, kind of a downer. But once again, that's also considering what it was previous. So
I can definitely see the shaky cam stuff being a bit of a pain to kind of tolerate. I forgot that was a cinematography trend for a while because of the Bourne movies. Oh my god. I completely forgot.
But it worked in Bourne because it fit, because you have this super agent who can move fast and is very deadly, and that shakiness made it unpredictable and made you feel the impact. Why is there a shaky cam sequence in a car chase sequence? Why? Why is that there? All right, so let's get into a theme song and opening credits. And the theme song is Another Way to Die, written by Jack White, performed by Jack White and Alicia Keys.
I quite liked it. It isn't quite as impactful as You Know My Name that we had seen in Casino Royale.
Right.
But, yeah, I quite like the song.
You know, I gotta be honest. When I think of Alicia Keys, I think of her songs that are, like, really popular, and she has that really distinctive, booming, and powerful voice but also is still beautiful in that way. And it's really her signature, but I think the song didn't have that in this. But I think it's mainly because it's a rock song. Not that I'm saying that she couldn't do it, but I just don't think it kind of gelled with her voice in that end. But it's not a bad song, but when I realized this was Alicia Keys, I was like, oh, all right. Okay, cool, I guess.
And it's kind of funny because when I was trying to just double check who sang the song and everything after I saw the movie and everything, I was just like, really? Alicia Keys? Wow, I would have not pegged Alicia Keys as the female singer in that song. Holy cow. She doesn't have the soulfulness that she's known for, so it kind of threw me for a loop when I had that revelation too. I was just like, really?
You know, I don't think she's bad. I just think it was the style of the song. It was a rock song, and I just don't think it kind of gelled well with her voice. But I don't think it's bad.
Not.
I don't think it's bad, though. But I just think... I think I had the same reaction you did. I was like, oh, it's Alicia Keys? Huh. Interesting. But, oh well. I will say the visual style of the credits is actually pretty good. I actually like the way it looks. It, again, focuses heavily on Bond, while showing some beautifully artistic-looking pictures of the settings of the film.
At the opening sequence, it's got a little bit more realism compared to sort of animated sequence that we had with Casino Royale, but it isn't bad. It isn't terrible like we saw during the Brosnan era when they're just like, oh, let's have sexy Bond girls in CG and just fucking throw a bunch of money at it and it'll be good. It isn't like terrible like that, but it was just kind of a, oh, neat. They're kind of going this direction with the opening sequence. Okay, well, you know, it's not terrible.
All right, so let's get into our conclusion. Zero, what did you think of Quantum of Solace?
I will say mission accomplished, but I have very, very small margin. While there are some points that I do love about Quantum of Solace, there are definitely flaws. This is by no means a perfect movie or anything that comes close to Casino Royale, but at the same time, I don't think it's absolutely horrible. The action sequences, they're not quite as great as some of the stuff that we saw in Casino Royale, but I did kind of like the spy and espionage related sequences. I thought those were pretty good. I kind of like the journey to darkness and Bond's redemptions towards the end of the movie as kind of like an element that I kind of observe. That's definitely why I quite like this movie a lot. Camille is a bit of a weak Bond girl story-wise, and Dominic Green is kind of like your planning a supervillain and everything, which is kind of just standard Bond fare, and it almost makes him forgettable to a sense. Now, with that being said, I would say for the continuity of the story, give Quantum of Solace a watch, especially if you have just finished watching Casino Royale, because I think it's worth it to at least give it a watch.
I think Quantum of Solace is in a pretty unfair spot. I will give it a mission accomplished, but it is the next film after a Bond film that is widely considered the best of the actual series. I will in no way, shape, or form say that Quantum of Solace is as good as Casino Royale. It's just not. It really isn't. But what it does is it continues that story, and it shares some of those elements that make Casino Royale good, and puts it to this film. I think Quantum of Solace is kind of a double-edged sword in this, though, because on the one hand, it's taking those elements, and it's those elements that make it recommendable to me, but it's really a B-level version of Casino Royale, in a sense. It takes those elements from like the older ones that we all got used to and in times kind of got bored with, and then said, okay, well, why don't we just take those elements, put them in here, and see how it goes. And it went fine, but it's still kind of a disappointment. I think as just a continuation of Casino Royale, it's a recommendation. But if you are one of the few that didn't like Casino Royale, I don't see why you would watch this. Mission accomplished?
Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished for Quantum of Solace. Now, if you want my full review on this movie, you can go to my website at IamTheWiz.com. You'll have my full written review right on the site, along with a link to the video that has this review that you've just listened to. Thank you for listening to this review. If you want to know what we're reviewing in the next couple of days, you can look on the screen right now to see what's coming up next. If you like what you heard, go ahead and leave a like on this video. If you want to discuss your opinion on the film or the review itself, please leave a comment. And if you want to hear more, subscribe to the channel. Thank you again for listening. I will talk to you next time.